الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وتم التسليم على سيدنا مولانا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أزواجه وذرياته ومن اهتدى بهديه إلى يوم الدين. تركنا على المحجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيغ عنها إلا هالك ثم أما بعد. So first off, I'd like to welcome everyone back after we had a 2-week break for the Eid. And we're very appreciative everyone who came out tonight. I know there's many other things people could be doing on a Friday night. But as we discussed the last time when Shaykh Muhammad was here, we're living in a time period now where much of the essence of our deen, of what we think to be Islam, is lost, or we're losing much of it. Right? Because there's a form, there's an outer form to things, and then there's an essence. There's a qishra, the shell, and then there's a lub, which is the essence of things. So if you only look at the qishra, you only look at the shell, you'll see people praying, you'll see people going to masajid, if you see the gum'ah is full, you'll see many women dressing hijab and men wearing so-called Islamic clothing and so forth. But if you scratch the surface and you go beyond the shell and you look to the essence or the lub, you may be disappointed in what you find, right? Because the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't come to change people's outer forms. He didn't come to make the less handsome man a more handsome man, nor did he come to make the less beautiful woman a more beautiful woman from the outside, but rather from the inside. So his focus, right, mahal nadarihi, was the qulub, or the hearts. And that's ultimately what the deen is about. It's about changing hearts, not about changing the outer forms of things. And we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't look to our outer forms, right? لا ينظر إلى صوركم ولكن ينظر إلى قلوبكم. He looks to our hearts. And even, the Surah Al-Hajj, the Dhabiha that some of us did last week for Eid al-Adha wal-Udhiyah, right? Its blood nor will reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but rather taqwa minkum. ولكن التقوى minkum. So taqwa, again, it's a state of the heart. It's not an outward thing. Right? You can't look at someone and say, فلان عنده تقوى أو ما عنده تقوى. You have to discern by the interaction with them, and you can see by their behavior whether there's a level of taqwa there. But ultimately taqwa is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is a greater realization, a greater understanding of al-Mawla Azza wa Jal, that lends you, that informs you in everything that you do. Right? Not just in your ibadat, not just in how you interact inside the masjid or you interact on Islamic holidays, but rather how you deal with everything that you do. And we live in a crisis time. It's unfortunate in this country that Eid al-Adha has become synonymous with taharruj al-jinsi, or sexual harassment of young girls who want to go walking in the streets. And they avoid it for the Eid, bizzat, because that's when they're more apt to get harassed. So obviously something's wrong. Obviously something of the heart, something of the tarbiyah, something. We're not practicing Islam in the way that we should be. One of the steps that we can take to remedy that, obviously, is to remedy ourselves first, right? Is to work on ourselves, our own inner states. And people traditionally, whether we're talking about today or even centuries or years ago, they don't change by things that you really say, right? You can try to convince someone of an argument, you can yell, you can shout, you can smile, but ultimately it's your state, your hal, your mu'amala, right? Your khuluq, that's going to change someone else. That's more convincing, right? The Arab, they say, رب لسان الحال أفصح من لسان المقال. Perhaps the tongue of your hal, right, the eloquence of your state, is more eloquent than your tongue could be, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he described people who have eloquence in tongue, right? إن في البيان لسحرا, right? And this is the eloquence of the tongue. The bayan, there's a sihr, there's a type of magic, right? And sihr, magic, is something madmoom, it's not mahmoud, something that's condemnable when it's used in a way to allure people to things that are not commendable, then it's a type of magic. And rather the dayan of the heart, right, that brings people to you or brings people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's the true dayan, that's the true iblag, that's the true message when you send it. And you can't lead people from your heart unless you yourself are speaking with your heart. Right? They say that ما خرج من اللسان لم يتجاوز الأذان وما خرج من القلب يصل إلى القلب. That which has left only from the tongue will go no further than the ears, and that which has gone out from the heart will penetrate the hearts. And so to have a penetrating heart, another heart that penetrates others, you yourself must be penetrated. You yourself must be affected. You yourself must inculcate this particular hal and state of knowing the deen, not only by its forms, but by its essence, by its lub. And the best example that we have, obviously, for that is the Prophet ﷺ himself. The best example in all things. And the book that we're reading, hopefully that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us tawfiq in finishing it, Kitab al-Shama'il, Imam al-Tirmidhi, goes through the attributes, both the physical attributes, as well as the non-physical or intangible attributes of the Prophet ﷺ. In other words, characteristics, the way he was, his character, the way he treated his wives, the way he treated his children, the way he treated people he didn't know, how he spoke to people, how he sat, how he ate, how he drank, things like this. So all of these are chapters within the Shama'il, and we started last week beginning with as-sifat al-khalqiyya, or those attributes that are the physical outer attributes. And we mentioned last week, for those who weren't here, and as a reminder for those who were, that there is no singular person in history, period, that we know more about than the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, right? No one can claim that we know more about Isa or Jesus Christ alayhi salam than we know about Muhammad ﷺ. We don't. Not even the Christians who claim to know him don't know more about him than we do, than we know about our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because we have a perfect record, a recording of most of what he did, how he acted, how he even spoke, right? How he read the Quran, how his hand gestures were and his hand movements when he was speaking, what clothes he used to wear, the things that he used to eat, the things he didn't like to eat, even those type of things that we call jibilla, or intrinsic characteristics. We know that about him as well from the people who are around him, his companions, who we call Sahaba, and also from his wives, particularly those things of the matters inside the house that only they would know about. So we had started last week, I think we were the first 5 or 6 hadith, if I'm not mistaken, dealing with the physical attributes of the Prophet ﷺ. So we start with the 7th. Those of you who have a book, I believe it's page 9, if I'm not mistaken. So just a reminder, we were going to read the full hadith in Arabic, but I will explain as best as I can the meanings in English and some commentary on the hadith, and then we'll proceed in that particular matter. قال الإمام رحمه الله: حدثنا أحمد بن عبدة الضبي البصري وعلي بن حجر وأبو جعفر محمد بن الحسين وابن أبي حليمة والمعنى واحد قالوا: حدثنا عيسى بن يونس عن عمر بن عبد الله مولى غفرة قال: حدثني إبراهيم بن محمد من ولد علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه قال: كان علي إذا وصف رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: لم يكن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بالطويل الممطط ولا بالقصير المتردد، وكان ربعة من القوم، لم يكن بالجعد القطة ولا بالصبت، كان جعدا رجلا، لم يكن بالمطهم ولا بالمكنثم، وكان في وجهه تدوير، أرجل مشرب، أدعج العينين، أهدم الأشفار، جليل المشاش والكتد، أجرد، ذو مسربة، شثن الكفين والقدمين، إذا مشى تقلع كأنما ينحط في صدب، وإذا التفت معا، بين كتفيه خاتم النبوة وهو خاتم النبيين، أجود الناس صبرا وأصدق الناس لهجة، وألينهم عريكة وأكرمهم عشرة، من رآه بديهة هابة، ومن خالفه معرفة أحبه يقول ناعت لم أرى قبله ولا بعده مثله صلى الله عليه وسلم. And this is narrated by himself at Tirmidhi fi Sunan and Bayhaqi fi Shu'ab wa Dalail. So here we have this hadith. The Sahaba that's narrating it is Ali ibn Abi Talib, or one of the children of Ali ibn Abi Talib, not from Fatima but from the wife that he married afterwards, Muhammad al-Hanifiyya. And he said that if Ali or his father were to describe the Prophet ﷺ, he would describe him in this way. And as we've seen in the hadith before, the way that the Arabs used to describe things is usually they give you a balance between two extremes. That's a particular thing that you find repeated in the way that many of the ulama speak and write about attributes in particular. Whether it be a physical attribute or whether it would be a character attribute. It will always be something, you have two extremes. So you have very tall and then you have very short. And then you have something in between that's not at either extreme. And you can have someone who's very generous or too generous, and someone who's very stingy, and then you have something in between. You can have someone who's too courageous, which would be reckless, and then you can have someone who doesn't have any courage at all, which would be cowardice, and then you have courage, real courage, which is somewhere in between. So the same for the physical attributes, right? In the Arab they say طَعْرَفُ الْأَشْيَاءُ بِأَضْدَادِهَا. Sometimes you can't know a thing unless you know its opposites, right? You can't really know what black is unless you know what white is. You don't know what tall is unless you know what short is. And that's the nature of many attributes. So here we see he's doing the same thing. So he says in the first line, لم يكن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بالطويل الممغط ولا بالقصير المتردد. Right? So here he was neither too tall, and we'll see that many of these ahadith have what we call alfaz ghariba, or not strange words as one would like to translate them, but words that are used very sparingly in the Arabic language. And it's a whole science or discipline called gharib al-alfaz. And you find many of the ulama, they wrote about gharib al-hadith. They'll talk about the words or the mustalahat in the hadith that are not well known, or gharib al-Quran, which is much less obviously than gharib al-hadith. And so you find that the amount of Arabic, actually, just on a side note, the number of root words in the Quran, right? Because the Arabic language is primarily made of three-letter roots. So when I say alima, to know, that's a three-letter root, and from there you can get ya'lamu wa ya'lamuna wa huwa a'lamu kada. So all of these are derived from that same three-letter root, or hatta allama, which is now a fourth letter added, makes it mazid, but they all derive from that triliteral root, as it's called, or mujarrad al-thulathi. And so the number of those root words in the Quran, the ulama say they don't number more than about 1,800 or so, 1,800 of these in the Quran. And then in the hadith, they are somewhat more than that. And the number in the language itself numbers in the tens of thousands, 80 or 90,000. So it's a very, very small subset of that that's actually used in the text that we need to read. And I'm saying this because this is a way for those who want to be encouraged to learn the Arabic that you need to actually read and understand the Quran is not that much compared to how much is in the language itself. So you find in these ahadith, you find words that are gharib, or that are not that used. And Tirmidhi, the narrator of this hadith, you find in the later section, which I should have read with this, he gives a meaning, he describes the meanings of some of these words that are not very well used. And amongst them he says, الممغط الذاهب طولا قال وسمعت أعربيا يقول في كلامه تمغط في نشابتي أي مدها مدا شديدا. So Abu Isa, who is Imam al-Tirmidhi, who compiled this book, he thought that it was necessary to give the definitions of some of these words, because even in his time, which is only a few generations removed from the Prophet ﷺ, these words were not that well known. So الطويل المضبط يعني المفرط في الطول, or someone who is extremely tall. So he was neither extremely tall ولا بالقصير المتردد, nor was he extremely short, right? And the word متردد, he says here, الداخل بعضه في بعض قصرا, like you can't tell where his neck starts and where his limbs begin because it's kind of all put together. So there's taraddud, in other words, there's a doubt about how tall they are, how short, and so forth. So he wasn't too short, nor was he too tall. And the other hadith told us, وَكَانَ يَمِيلُ إِلَى الطُّولِ, but he was closer to tallness, obviously for Arabs, not for other ethnic groups who can be much taller, but for Arabs he was closer to being tall than he was to being short. وَكَانَ رَبْعَةً مِنَ الْقَوْمِ, right? وَالرَّبْعَ وَالْمَرْبُوعَ بِمَعْنَى, which means that he was of medium build and size for his people. لم يكن بالجعد القطة ولا بالسلط, right? And here it's describing his hair, as we mentioned before, and جعد القطة, which means very curly hair, very wiry hair. So he didn't have that. ولا بالسلط, nor was it very fine. كان جعدا رجلا, right? But rather his hair was somewhat wavy, but fine in the sense that it could be combed. And we'll see in some of the hadith that come later how the Prophet ﷺ would comb his hair on occasion. So if it was wet or something, he would split it in the middle. He would part it in the middle. So he would have like a part on this side and a part on that side. And sometimes he would let it just come down on his forehead. And there's more description of his hair that's going to come later on. So his hair wasn't too curly that he couldn't comb it in that manner, nor was it too fine that it would just naturally by itself come down finally. لم يكن بالمطهم ولا بالمكلثم, right? And the Imam Abu Isa says المطهم فالباد الكثير اللحم والمكلثم المدور الوجه. So the mutahham means someone who is like closer to obesity than to a normal state, to a normal build. So he wasn't that, nor was he a mukaltham, someone who had too round a face. ولكن كان في وجهه تدوير, but his face was somewhat rounded, so it wasn't very completely elliptical, but there was some roundness to it. But again, as they're describing him, they're describing it in a balanced way. So even when we say roundness, it wasn't a roundness that was munafir, yani a roundness that people would not deem to be beautiful. أبيض مشرب, here it's talking about his skin color. أبيض مشرب. So أبيض means white, mushrab means there's a kind of tinge to it. So he wasn't a pale white, but he was a type of white, and usually the tinge they're talking about, and mushrab or sharba, it would be red, or ahmar. So it was a whiteness that was sort of, because of the, let's say the health, the good health of the Prophet ﷺ, then underneath that skin there would be sort of a tinge of redness. So he was not completely dark, nor was he completely white or pale, but somewhere in between. أدعج العينين, right? أدعج العينين, describing his eyes. With أدعج is the one, there's two particular interpretations for it. Either the one whose blackness or the iris of the eye, or the pupil of the eye is very dark as compared to the whiteness that surrounds it, for the color of the eye. Or it's very distinctive, being able to see the pupil from around the whiteness, or I guess it's called the iris of the eye. أهدب الأشفار, here describing the eyelashes, right? أهدب الأشفار, أهدب يعني وافر. So the eyelashes were long, right, or plentiful, but again not in a way that would be effeminate or in a way that would be deemed not masculine. جليل المشاش والكتد. Well, mushash are the joints, especially here it's talking about the shoulder joints, where the arm meets the shoulder, or the knees. where the thigh meets the lower leg. So jalil means azim, yani something that sort of big in terms of where those joints met. So he wasn't fine boned, but rather he was more thick boned. But again, not to an extent that would be considered out of the ordinary or strange. Well cutted. Well cutted also is referring to the joints. Ajrad. Here ajrad, either referring to that, because the next section is talking about the hair that he had on his arms and on his chest. So ajrad meaning he had no hair except for that which is mentioned following, or ajrad meaning when you can see his his arms or hands, and there's not clothing over them, you can see a sort of light there that you see, and that will come later, the explanation of this. Dhu masrabatin, right? Well, masruba, they say is, it's kind of interesting that the Arabs even have a word for this, because we don't even have a word in English, which is a thin line of hair coming from right underneath the collar to the navel, to the belly button. So the Sahaba did see the Prophet ﷺ his chest on occasion, and so it was a thin line of hair coming from right here in the collar all the way down to the navel, and not hair on either of his breastplates or on his stomach, as described in the hadith. شثن الكفين والقدمين, right? والشثن also is referring to here الغليظ الأصابع من الكفين والقدمين, a type of ghilza or thickness to the hands and to the feet. So not having very fine, delicate fingers, but rather something that's closer to a stronger type of hand. To the joints in the fingers themselves would be something that closer to a bigger size and a smaller size. So there he stops, and so far he's described physically what he looks like. And then he goes on to the next part of the hadith here, and he's going to sort of describe how he walked and even how he interacted with people. So getting into something that's more of a meaningful description of the character of the Prophet ﷺ. So Sayyidina Ali says, إِذَا مَشَى تَطَلَّعَ كَأَنَّمَا يَنْحَطُّ فِي صَدَبٍ. Right? إِذَا مَشَى تَطَلَّعَ. وَالْقَلَعَ, right? Same word as إِقْلَعَ when a plane takes off, or قَلَعَ الْأَسْنَانِ when you pull out a tooth. So it's saying that when he walked, it's as if he puts his foot down, and then it's like he ripped something of the ground out, literally, as he's walking. So his walking was a deliberate walking, purposeful type of walking. Yani mashi dhu hadaf, not just a stroll. He didn't stroll, right? His walking was something that was purposeful, and he was going somewhere, and wherever he went and walked was somewhere important. كَأَنَّمَا يَنْحَطُّ فِي صَدَدٍ. This came in a hadith last week, as if he was coming down a slope, because there was a vigor to his walk. I'm not going to say speed per se, right? He wasn't walking too fast that looked like it was funny, but a purposefulness and a vigor to his walk that was clearly unmistakable when one would look at him and see the way that he would walk. With التفت معه, right? And when he turns to someone, specifically when he's turning around behind his back, he would turn completely. So he wouldn't, move his neck all the way around to look like this behind him, because that's deemed something where they say mukhil bil muru'ah, yani something that's not really becoming of someone of his dignity and of his respect. And also it shows respect when you're speaking to someone or you're turning towards someone, that you give them your full attention, right? You turn to them all the way. And at the very least, if he had someone on his right, on his left, he would at least turn and look at them and address them and they address him. But this is, I emphasize this a little bit because nowadays we have a sort of phenomenon where people are like doing other things when you're trying to talk to them. They'll be playing with their phone, or they'll be doing something else, and you're talking to them and they're not actually with you. And that person might be paying attention to what you're saying, but it leaves you with the feeling like, I guess whatever you're doing with your phone is more important than what you have to hear me to say. And the Prophet ﷺ كان يجبر بالخواطر, right? He would always take someone's khatira. He would always look out. He was very people-oriented in that sense. You know, I took one of these management training things. They talk about people-oriented and task-oriented and so forth. But he was someone who was very people-oriented in the sense that he would look out for people's feelings. And he would do his utmost to ensure that no one's feelings were hurt. And to such an extent, to such a great deal, that every one of the Sahaba always thought he was the one most beloved by him. They all thought I was number one in his book. And we all know we may have said this last week, but the famous hadith of Amr ibn al-As, where he said, I felt like the Prophet ﷺ, I was the best companion that he had. So he wanted to actually test the theory, and so he went and asked the Prophet ﷺ, you know, who's better, me or Uthman? He's like, or me or Abu Bakr first. He said, no, Abu Bakr is better than you. He's like, okay, I'm number two. How about me or Umar? No, Umar is better than you too. Okay, number three, me or Uthman? No, actually. And then he kept saying names until he said, I wish I never asked him. Right? So he had to be sincere when the Prophet ﷺ told him, but he always made people feel like they were, you know, the most important thing he was doing right then and right at that time. And we can take an example for that in how we deal with other people, we deal with our children, we deal with spouses and things like this. And I remind myself before anyone else, we live such a sort of fast pace, and you got to be doing a million things at once, so we feel it's quite normal to play with the phone or the computer while someone is talking. But you know, the person walks away thinking that, you know, I don't think I'm that important, or, you know, I kind of wasted their time or something like that. So, فالتفت معه بين كتفيه خاتم النبوة. Between his shoulders on the back, there was the khatam, or the seal of prophethood. There's actually a separate chapter that comes after this one talking about khatam al-nubuwah, so I'm not going to go into too much now, but it was a physical mark that was between his shoulders, that was something like, they say, the size of an egg, or something like that, or a quail egg, in between his two shoulders. And as we know from the seerah, this is one of the signs that people who knew of the coming of the Prophet ﷺ, like the Jews and others who had it in their books that he was coming, this is one of the things they looked for. They looked for Khatam al-Nubuwah because it was mentioned in their books, in the Injil or Torah, and they looked for it when they found the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. أجود الناس صدرا, right? أجود الناس صدرا. In another way it says أوسع الناس صدرا. So al-jud or al-wus'a here is talking about, and sadr is his chest. But here it's not referring to the chest per se, it's talking about his heart. In other words, his dealing with people, the best word you can think of is that he had a lot of tolerance and clemency, a lot of patience with people, no matter what their particular situation was, no matter how rude they became, no matter how even unconscionable their behavior was, even to the Sahaba around him. And there are many instances in the seerah where we find people doing outlandish things. Sorry about that. So there are many instances in the seerah where certain things would be done in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ or to him, and you would find the reaction of the companions much more than his own reaction. Like the A'rabi who would walk into the mosque and not knowing he would urinate in a corner of the mosque, and the Sahaba ready to get up and, you know, do something to him, and he tells them stop, don't do anything, and he goes and he actually cleans it up himself. So we had أجود الناس صدرا أوسع الناس صدرا means he had so much tolerance for what people do and how they react and their level of understanding and so forth. And that's a rare attribute to find in people today. Most people, when they become somewhat more in tune with their religion, become a little more religious, one of the early things that they go through, or even that can afflict them later, is that they have a sort of intolerance for people who are not as religious as they are. And we have to be very careful with that, because we live in societies now that are very fragmented and categorized. So if you seem to be like a religious person, yani mahsub ala deen, then people will look at you not just as your individual self, but they'll look at you as a representative of the deen. That's where the danger comes in. Whether you like it or not, you may say to yourself, I don't want to be that, but nevertheless people will look at you like that. If a woman wears hijab, if a man appears religious, then they're gonna say, fulan mutadayyin kada. So when they see that, and then if something were to come from you of a type of behavior that would only validate the suspicions they already have, right? I've spoken to many people who for one reason or another don't practice Islam that much, and the recurring theme that I hear most often is that, well, this person prays, but look, they're terrible. They steal, they lie, they cheat, they do this. So they have a justification of their own behavior by people who seem to be religious, their bad behavior. And so when this happens, you become a fitna for people. You become a test and a trial, either knowingly or unknowingly, for other people. And to the extent that you could actually be pushing them away from something that they could have entered into, or they could have known more about, but because of the way you are, that pushes them away. And so it's a natural human inclination to want to see moral uprightness with ibadat, with outward religiosity. If they don't see that, and they see there's a conflict between the two, then oftentimes it's enough to push them away.
Is it always my fault if I'm not that right person, doing everything in the right way? Yani, he's thinking, مثلا, or whatever, he's thinking that I'm a good person, I'm always doing the right thing. It's both his fault.
Of course, no, we can't say that it's all our fault, but it's just something to keep in mind. يعني حاجة تكون في بالنا that people are going to look at us like that, especially in Egypt, in Cairo, and right now, and the way things are, because people are looking for a type of excuse to criticize people of religion, and especially the political system and the turmoil it's going through and so forth. So people are waiting for that. It's like they're waiting for you to make a mistake, and it's a kind of charged environment. But nonetheless, we have to be that much better. I mean, we have to surprise them, more or less, because there are people there who are validating their suspicion. There's too many people who talk the talk and have the big beard and seem to have all that, but they do unspeakable things. These so-called Shaykh, I don't really like to use that word, that we see on TV and accuse people of zina and adultery and all sorts of things. شرعاً هذا لا يجوز بالمرة أبدا. And in fact, someone who accuses someone else of that type of act of zina or fornication, adultery, without any witnesses, هذا اسمه قذف المحصنات. And if you do that, then you're the one who's punished. If you have two other witnesses besides yourself, and you don't have a fourth, you would still be considered to be applicable the punishment to you for falsely accusing someone of that type of act. This so-called sheikh or shuyukh, they're juhada. They don't know anything. They don't even know the simplest ahkam, the simplest legal rulings in the deen. But yet, what happens as a result is tanfir. People, say, if that's a religion, I don't want that. And honestly, I can't blame them. If that was what I know of Islam and those people and the way they look and the way they act and talk and their accusations, I wouldn't want to be that either. So the way to counter that is to show people that that's not what it really is. That's not the legacy of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. That person is not Muhammadan in character. He doesn't act like him, he doesn't look like him, he doesn't talk like him. He doesn't show any of the true essence of what the Prophet ﷺ came with. Right? لم يكن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم باللعان ولا بالسخاب في الأسواق. He wouldn't curse people. He wouldn't yell in the marketplace. He wouldn't disparage people. He wouldn't do any of those things.
So sometimes you feel that you're loaded with this. Yani, I I heard a story a few days ago. A man who had a beard, he did something wrong. It wasn't his mistake. He said, I'm sorry. But the other man told him, عيب على دقنك روح احلقها. And I know this guy is a very nice guy and he's a good guy.
See,
why it's his fault?
No, it's not his fault, but we can't change other people's perception. We can only change what we can do. So it's fine, but that's, you have to keep in mind that people who, you have to understand the psychology of the person who feels a little bit guilty that they're not doing things right. But when they see someone so-called mutadayyin and someone so-called religious making a mistake, they feel so great about that. Why? Because it validates, it gives them a justification for the way that they are. They said, oh, well, Fulan, he's a Shaykh, look what he's doing that, I'm not so bad. Means they have a little bit of guilt. And that person who said, haram ala da'nak, he has deen. Right? Because if he didn't have deen, he wouldn't even say that much. There's some deen in him, there's some good in him, because he sees that part and he feels guilty, so he feels the need to go and say something like that. So someone like that, there's good in them. And I remind myself, for everyone else, we have to look for the good in the people before we see the bad. You'll see a lot of bad, you'll see a lot of things you don't like. The more that you read about the Prophet ﷺ, the companions and how they were, you'll say to yourself, nothing is like what we're reading about. Everything outside is different. Right? But if you think about what he had to deal with, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? 360 idols in the Kaaba, people sometimes going around making tawaf naked, lying, cheating, stealing, violence being done. You cannot say with any sort of conscience that what they had was much better than what we're dealing with now. What we're dealing with now is nothing compared to what our predecessors had to deal with. And even after the time of the Sahaba, even throughout our history, there have been many, many difficult situations. The fall of Baghdad, the fall of the Abbasid Empire in 658 was a catastrophe for the Ummah, a complete catastrophe. But there were great ulama who came around that time, like Imam al-Nawawi, Imam al-Ghazali sometime before that. And then after them, Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, Imam Ibn al-Hajib, and many of the great ulama who came later on. So it's not a good measure to say that, well, it's so difficult now and it's impossible and they didn't have it like we had it. The difference between us and them is that maybe we have fewer people, percentage-wise, those who can admonish us, those who can advise us, those who can remind us. And that's why we're trying to come together and do this, because we need more people like that. We need to have more people in the society to be able to fix things. Society is not going to be fixed from the top. It's going to be fixed by individuals, and then by families, and then by communities, and then by the greater society around them. Wallahu a'lam. It's a long topic. It's something we can spend much time on, but we'll touch on it here and there, inshallah. فَأَجْوَدُ النَّاسِ صَدْرًا, right? أَجْوَدُ النَّاسِ صَدْرًا. He was someone who had a lot of compassion, a lot of tolerance, and a lot of understanding for the human condition. He knew where people were coming from, right? When the A'rabi would come and speak in his particular accent that none of the other Sahaba would know, he would reply to them in their same accent, their same lahja. When they would come, he would also ask them about, who are your poets? Don't you know Fulan and Fulan? One time he said to one of them, don't you know Umayy ibn Abi Salt, who was one of the poets from a tribe in the middle of the Arabian Peninsula? And no one else knew from the locals in Medina what the Prophet ﷺ was talking about. But that is in fact from amongst his mu'jizat, from amongst his miracles, that he had knowledge of the language. Right? Imam al-Shafi'i said, لا يحيط باللغة إلا نبي. No one can know the language really except the Prophet. That's like a mu'jizat. That he was able to speak to them and reply to them in the same distinctive dialect that they came with. And he was able to win hearts in this way. He wasn't there to smite the heads off, he was there to win hearts, to bring hearts to the deen. وَأَصْدَقُ النَّاسِ لَهْجَةً. Right here, lahja originally means tongue or language, but in this context, it's talking about his speech. Asdaq, yani the most truthful of people in what they spoke. Right? Even his most alad al-a'da, his worst enemies, were asked, هل جربتم عليه الكذب? Did you ever find him to be a liar? لم نجرب عليه الكذب قط. We never found him to lie. He was known as Al-Amin. Al-Amin. The person that they would leave their wada'a, would leave their valuables with, even when they were fighting him, even when they were boycotting him, even when they were sending armies to him in Medina. He would be the one they left their valuables with. Ali stayed back after the Hijrah, radiallahu anhu, just to return many of these wada'a, many of these valuables that people had left with him as he was making the migration of the Hijrah to Al-Medina. So no one can ever claim that he lied about anything, period. And even our worst enemies, the people who disparage Islam much, they can't find anywhere where he lied about anything. أصدق الناس لهجة وألينهم عريكة. والعريكة الطبيعة, or a personality, or like a trait, personal trait or personal characteristic. ألينهم, right? Lean. And it's interesting, the word alien here was used instead of many other attributes. And when you're dealing with arika or tabi'a, it's talking about how one deals with other people, right? فَاللِّينُ وَالرِّفْقِ. So gentleness and ease, right, is how he was described in this particular hadith. And this word lean, you find it in other places, like in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructed Musa and Harun, Moses and Aaron, to go to Pharaoh, Fir'aun, فَقُولَا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا, right? لَيِّنًا. And who is Fir'aun? Right? He is Malik al-Jababara. He is the worst tyrant who ever lived. There's no one enemy mentioned more in the Quran than Fir'aun. لعله even more than Satan himself. He's mentioned in the Quran, Fir'aun. But nevertheless, قُولَا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا لَعَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرُ أَوْ يَخْشَى. But he wasn't. There wasn't any tadhakkur wala khashya. It wasn't going to happen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew it wasn't going to happen. But nevertheless, that's not the point. The point is, he's teaching, right? The prophets themselves are teaching those that come after, even with a tyrant, even with the worst of tyrants, قُولَا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا. When you're bringing the message to them for the first time in a way that's palpable, that they can understand. قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا. So he was أَلْيَنَ النَّاسِ أَلْيَنَهُمْ عَرِيكَةً. He was the most soft, the most gentle in his manner with people, Muslim and non-Muslim. Right? We have this picture in our head that أعزة على الكافرين, right? الآية قبلها لا that's أشداء على الكفار رحماء بينهم, أو حتى that آية أشداء على الكفار رحماء بينهم, describing Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم and his companions. أشداء على الكفار رحماء بينهم. People read that verse and or the other verse, أعزة على الكافرين أذلة على المؤمنين أعزة على الكافرين, right? Another verse that, so we are merciful amongst fellow Muslims, وأشداء على الكفار, but we are stern and tough with people who are not Muslim, or I should say kuffar, as the Quran says. Or the other verse, أذلة على المؤمنين أعزة على الكافرين لا يخافون في الله لومة لائم. Here, al-izz, right, or stern or dignified with the kuffar, adillah, and humbled with the other believers. Some people interpret that erroneously, that means we have to be very stern, we don't give them salam, we don't look at them, we don't deal with them, kada, we're not allowed to interact with them. That's not what the verse is talking about. Because one, here, the verse didn't say al-mushrikeen, it said al-kuffar. And kufr is a state of the heart. Just like iman is a state of the heart. Just like nifaq, hypocrisy, is a state of the heart. So if that's the case, you don't really know who the kuffar are. So how can you be أشداء على الكفار رحماء بينهم? Where is the shidda على الكفار? What it's talking about is shidda على طريقة الكفار. Right? It's dealing with the ways of kufr, not with the kuffar per se. So those things that are of kufr, those things that are obviously are not coming from or are not in tune with an Islamic ethos and understanding, are rejected. Absolutely. Right? Things that are not in line with what we believe and how we practice our deen, cheating, lying, stealing, that's all acts of people who are not believers, even though believers may do them, non-believers may do them. So it's talking about dealing with the forces of kuffar, that which emanates from them more than the individuals themselves. And this is the danger of reading particular ayahs out of context and not understanding the whole meaning or the holistic meaning of the Quran or the holistic meaning of the hadith. Because anyone can use a text, yani nas min al-Quran or min al-hadith, and make it seem like or support anything that he wants it to support. You take it out of context, you take a few words, you chop off here and there, and you can make it seem like it's supporting your argument. But that's not how you interpret the Quran or the Sunnah. You interpret the Quran and the Sunnah by understanding its maqasid, understanding its main objectives, understanding it in its themes and its entirety. Not taking little things here and there and then making those general rulings. This is a danger that many people are falling into. And especially non-specialists. People who claim to be Shaykh, right? It's not an honorific title. It's something that has to be earned. It's something that has to be validated by one's peers and one's teachers. If you don't have that, just putting Shaykh in the front of your name doesn't make you Shaykh, or teacher, or ustaz, or alim, or kada. And so, one of the signs you can discern for people who are making claims and are not really representing what they're claiming is that they'll take things out of context, and very often they'll mention individuals by name or groups by name and vilify them. That's not a prophetic trait. That's not how the Prophet ﷺ would show admonition or to even condemn a particular act. He wouldn't mention people by name. He would say, what do you think? مَا بَالُ قَوْمٍ يَفْعَلُونَ كَذَا وَكَذَا. What about a people who do such and such? Qawm. Very generic, very non-specific, not taking someone specifically. But when you find people getting specifics and mention fulan by name, fulan ala fikran dal وكذا احذر منه, fulan dal احذر منه. That's not the way of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So ألينهم عريكة وأكرمهم عشرة. Right, with ishra also is a type of mu'amala. Arika you can think more as like people dealing people the first time or people who are not that close. Al-ishra only happens after a longer period of experience with them. So here we enter into al-karam. فَأَكْرَمَهُمْ عِشْرَةً. The most generous, not just in wealth, not in giving in monetarily, but in giving of themselves. أَكْرَمَهُمْ عِشْرَةً. So he gave himself freely when he dealt with people. Right? He didn't sort of hold back on his generosity based upon the person in front of them. If he can give, he gave. من رآه بديهة هابه ومن خالته معرفة أحبه. This is one of the very famous lines from the Shama'il. You find it often repeated in some of the luhat, especially the Hilya, which is a description of the Prophet ﷺ. And it's a beautiful line, these two here, right? Because it gives you two words that seem sort of in contradiction to each other, but not really. Al-mahaba wal-mahabba. So here, من رآه بديهة, يعني you see him for the first time, هذا will be in awe. You see him for the first time, you'll be in awe. He'll just awe you. The Sahaba couldn't even look to the Prophet ﷺ, look up at his face, most of them, because they were in complete awe. They couldn't. It was just too much. One of them who came to him was shivering, يرتعش, and couldn't stop. And the Prophet ﷺ, هون عليك. But from عظمة الموقف, being in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, can you imagine? If he's sitting right here in front of us and we're sitting with him, and he's able to speak to us, and it's not imaginable. You can't imagine how it would be. وَمَنْ خَالَتَهُ مَعْرِفَةً أَحَبَّ. But those who got to know him, right, really know him, loved him. أَحَبَّ. All of the things that we're hearing now, these cartoons and the YouTube video or film, I don't know if it's a film, it's a video, and all these things directed towards criticizing the Prophet ﷺ. They're not criticizing the Prophet ﷺ, right? Even the Prophet ﷺ in his time, when the wife of Abu Lahab would criticize him and she would make this sort of mockery. His name is Muhammad. Muhammad means most praised, min al-hamd. And this is what we call a mubalagh form. So kathir at-tahmeed, yani people praise him often, the most oft praised. That's his name. right? And how true is the ism al-musamma huna, right? The name for that attribute which he had. There is no person more praised than the Prophet ﷺ. These little things that some person in Los Angeles got together and filmed a YouTube or cartoons, and it's nothing compared to how oft praised that he is, day and night, and year after year, and decade after decade, and century after centuries. If you add up all the people who are praising, there isn't a second of the day that someone is not praising the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Not a second of the day that's not saying La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, with the adhan, with dhikr, with salat on Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what is this little droplets next to an ocean of praise for him sallallahu alaihi wasallam? But so the wife of Abu Lahab, she wouldn't say Muhammad, she would say mudhammam, which is the opposite, min al-dhamm, which is to censure, to criticize someone. So he would tell, don't worry, they're criticizing mudhammam, not Muhammad. It's not me. Fa'lan, it's not him. They don't know him. What do they know about him? What does that cartoonist in Denmark know about the Prophet ﷺ? Do you think he ever opened up his Shama'il and read about him? Or his Sirah Nabawiyah? Or any of the translations? Or do you think he actually ever met a Muslim who was a true representative of the Prophet ﷺ in his essence or her essence and in their character? Do you think that ever happened to him? I can almost say with complete certainty that he didn't. So who is he talking about? Who's he writing? Who is he criticizing? He's criticizing Mudhammam. That's not our Prophet ﷺ, that's someone else. But his picture of Mudhammam came from where? Came from us, collectively. Right? That's what they think Islam is. They think Islam is what they see in the news, which for whatever reason it could be exaggerated, is incorrect, but there is some validity to it in that many of the acts that we do, that we purport to do, that we claim that reflect on the deen, reflect very, very badly on the deen. Right? When you get people on TV, and even in the way that they criticize those who criticize the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, right? Running to the American embassy here and getting to the top and ripping the American flag and throwing bottles and trying to hurt the police. Are you telling me that's indicative of the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ? Does that represent him? Or to go into the Libyan consulate and kill the ambassador, is that representative? Would he have done such a thing? Or after the Denmark controversy, the burning of the Danish embassy in Damascus, was that representative? What do they have to do with the whole thing? So, we have to inculcate the real character of the Prophet ﷺ, which means the sabr al adha. We have to be patient with people's intolerance and their own hatred towards us. Because if we meet a wrong with a wrong, it's going to go nowhere. But if we meet a wrong with our own true essence, who we're supposed to be, then things can change. من رأى بديهة هابة ومن خالته معرفة أحبه. يقول ناعته, يعني whoever who describes him will say this, لم أرى قبله ولا بعده مثله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Right, and he ends with this because there's so much more that could be said about him, but it's too much, you can't describe it. So to sort of summarize everything, you say, I haven't seen anyone before him, nor have I seen anyone after him like him صلى الله عليه وسلم. Right, and that's sort of almost the epitome of praise. When you say, I haven't seen anyone like him, either before or no one ever who came after him was like him either. Yani it's sort of admitting your incapacity to properly praise him, to praise him in the right way, in the way that he should be praised. And don't believe those people who say, be careful of these people because they love the Prophet ﷺ too much, or they praise him too much. Praise him too much? How do we praise him too much? واسمه محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. How can we praise him too much? Or الغلو في محبة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. كيف نكون متغالين في حب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم? How can we be too much? We didn't make him a god, but we made him the prophet of God, and that's his makana, that's his place. And if it were not for him, we wouldn't know Allah, we wouldn't know the deen, we wouldn't know the Quran, we wouldn't know who we are. The Sahaba didn't know who they were before him, and they didn't know who they were after him. Anas ibn Malik, he said, ما نفضنا أيدينا من دفن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم حتى أنكرنا قلوبنا أو أنكرنا نفوسنا. He said, we didn't finish burying the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم and dusting our hands from burying him until we didn't even know who we were anymore. We didn't know who we were. We didn't know our hearts. That was the biggest disaster actually. The biggest disaster ever to afflict this ummah was the death of the Prophet ﷺ. All that came after is hayyin, but that was the biggest. There was never a fitna like his death. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But he said about himself, Inna hayati khayrun lakum wa inna mamati khayrun lakum. My life is better for you, and also my death is also better for you. So the next part actually, he's just the alfaz. He was just describing them. You could read that, and we talked about it more or less. So I think we'll just read. This is a long hadith too. We'll just read the 8th hadith and see how much we can get through. Inshallah, that's okay. Right? حدثنا سفيان بن وكيع قال حدثنا جميع بن عمير بن عبد الرحمن العجلي إملاء علينا من كتابه قال أخبرني رجل من بني تميم من ولد أبي هالة زوج خديجة يكنى أبا عبد الله عن ابن لأبي هالة عن الحسن بن علي رضي الله عنهما قال سألت خالي هند بن أبي هالة وكان وصافا عن حلية رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وأنا أشتهي أن يصف لي منها شيئا أتعلق به فقال كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فخما مفخما يتلألأ وجهه تلألؤ القمر ليلة البدر أطول من المربوع وأقصر من المشذب عظيم الهامة رجل الشعر إذا انفرقت عقيقته فرقها وإلا فلا يجاوز شعره شحمة أذنيه إذا هو وفر أزهر اللون واسع الجبين أزج الحواجب سوابغ في غير قرن بينهما عرق يضره الغضب أقنى العرنين له نور يعلو يحسبه من لم يتأمله أشم كث اللحية سهل الخدين ضليع الفم مفلج الأسنان دقيق المأسربة كأن عنقه جيد دمية في صفاء الفضة معتدل الخلق بادن متماسك سواء البطن والصدر عريض الصدر بعيد أو بعيد ما بين المنكبين ضخم الكراديس أنور المتجرد موصول ما بين اللبة والسرة بشعر يجري كالخط عالي الثديين والبطن مما سوى ذلك أشعر الذراعين والمنكبين وأعالي الصدر طويل الزندين رحب الراحة شثن الكفين والقدمين سائل الأطراف أو قال شائل الأطراف خمسان الأخمصين مسيح القدمين ينبو عنهما الماء إذا زال قلعا يخطو تكفأ ويمشي هونا ذريع المشية إذا مشى كأنما ينحط من صبب وإذا التفت جميعا خافض الطرف نظره إلى الأرض أطول من نظره إلى السماء جل نظره الملاحظة يسوق أصحابه ويبدر من لقي السلام. This is probably the most famous hadith dealing with the description, the physical description of the Prophet ﷺ, of Hind Abu Hala, Ibn Abi Hala. And he was related to Khadija radiallahu anha, so he was a nephew of Khadija, and he had lived with the Prophet ﷺ in the same household, so he knew him quite well. Or he was actually the stepson of the Prophet ﷺ from Khadija from a previous marriage. Khadija radiallahu anha was married twice before. She married the Prophet ﷺ, and she was widowed twice, and she had some children, and one of them was Hind ibn Abi Hala. And Abu Hala was a previous husband for Sayyidah Khadija. So he was close to him, and he described him. And it's described in this hadith, وَكَانَ وَصَّافًا عَنْ حِلِيَةِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. So in other words, he was well known for his ability to describe in detail the Prophet ﷺ, at least even his physical description. كَانَ وَصَّافًا لِحِلِيَةِ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So first he says the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم was فَخْمًا مُفَخَّمًا. So al-fakhama is a greatness or a azama or type of awe that you see when you look at someone. Fakhman, in other words, he was great in his own person. Mufakhama, others saw him as great as well. So the two words are different. Fakhman, mufakhama. Mufakham, يعني مفخم من غيره. والفخم يعني فخما في نفسه. So he was both. So he wasn't just someone people thought to be great, he was great, as in the description of him. يتلألأ وجهه تلألؤ القمر ليلة البدر. Here يتلألأ من اللؤلؤ, right? And lu'lu is pearls. So his face radiated like the radiance of pearls, in the same manner the tala'lu of the qamar, the radiance of the moon on a full night, a full moon night. So like a 13th, 14th, and 15th of the month. This is a type of metaphor, a type of simile or tashbih. In other words, the Prophet ﷺ is being compared to the moon in a particular sense, in terms of its tala'lu, or its nur, its radiance. Usually in the language, when you compare, you have al-mushabbah wal-mushabbah bihi wa wajh al-tashbih. Right? Al-mushabbah is that which you're comparing something. Wal-mushabbah bihi, what you're comparing it to. Wajh al-tashbih, what's being compared, what particular attribute is compared from those. So if I say Abdullah, my son, he is as strong as his brother Abdurrahman. Masalan. That means, if I'm comparing Abdullah to Abdurrahman, means that the attribute of strength is more in Abdurrahman than it is in Abdullah. Even though I said he's as strong. Because what's being compared to has to have more of the attribute than that which is being compared from. Except when we talk about the Prophet ﷺ. So when we say we're comparing him to the moon in its radiance, it's not a valid comparison. Actually, what we should be doing is comparing the moon to him. Right? Because the moon is nothing compared to his radiance. And some of the Sahaba, and it's mentioned, and I think Al-Bayhaqi says this, that when the moon would be out and they saw the Prophet ﷺ, it's like they didn't see the moon. They didn't see the moon, they saw him. Because he was more radiant in that sense. In a physical sense, more radiant even than the moon. But in order to draw a comparison, to give people some idea, they had to compare him to something else. And another hadith, you'll find him compared to the sun, right? The radiance of the sun, or shams. Again, to give a type of description of understanding, just some idea. So يتلألأ وجهه تلألؤ القمر ليلة البدر. But he was even more than that. أطول من المربوع وأقصر من المشذب. This we did before in terms of his height, taller than the average medium build, but not too short. عظيم الهامة. And hama here is the head. So he had a physically large head in comparison, relatively speaking. And this was something that was mamduh عند العرب. It was something that was desirable for the Arabs of his time. رجل الشعري, his hair was not too curly, but it was slightly wavy. إذا انفرقت عقيقته, والعقيقة is the bangs on the front or the forehead. So if when he parts it, it was able to be parted easily, he would part it. Otherwise, he would let it fall. وإلا فليجاوز شعره شحمة أذنيه إذا هو وفر. And then usually his hair would not go beyond, shahmat al-udhun is like the earlobe right here. And it said that the longest his hair would ever be would be right before the shoulders. So even a little bit longer than that, sometimes over here, but varying in length from the earlobe to right before the shoulders. Azhar al-lawn, again describing his skin color, a type of whiteness with some redness in it. Wasi' al-jabin, his forehead would be wide, again going with a larger head, which was also a desirable trait with the Arabs. Azaj al-hawajib sawabigha fi ghayri qaranin. Here the eyebrows. Azaj means mithl al-qos, or like rounded, like a bow, right? Sawabigh, full. Right, same word that we use, asbagh al-wudu, someone completes the wudu in the best way or in the most perfect way. So sawabit, so the eyebrows were in the most perfect way. في غير قرن, but they were not joined, so it wasn't a unibrow. So we had two distinct eyebrows. بينهما عرق يضره الغضب. In between them, here, there was a vein that when he became angry, it was discernible. And that's actually significant, because it kind of implies that we couldn't tell if he was angry unless we saw this become the vein here. We can see it. And the Prophet ﷺ did become angry in the sense that there were things that would make him angry, but his behavior would not reflect the behavior of an angry person or a violent person. Right? His anger only, and he would only become angry for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He never became angry on account of his own person. He would be praying in the Kaaba and they would come and bring the camel entrails and throw it on his back and so forth. It didn't make him angry. What made him angry is al-ghadab lillah. And when we talk about ghadab lillah, a lot of people like to claim that. It's kind of everybody's excuse. Their justification for doing bad things, doing really pretty awful things to other people. So, why did you yell at that person? Why did you slap them around? Why did you treat them this way? Why were you violent to this particular person? يا أخي أنا هذا غضب لله. Right? I'm angry for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were doing something Allah doesn't like, so that made me angry. Really? Did it really make something for Allah, or did it make you angry personally? Right? And oftentimes, going on the theme we mentioned before, we take things that affect us personally, and then we try to frame it in the framework of the deen. And this is where the real danger is, because other people can pick up on that. And so they start thinking that, well, if that's the deen, I don't want that. But it's all about your own personal shortcomings, your own personal anger. It's not about being angry for the deen, it's about your own personal anger. Imam al-Ghazali, Sahib al-Ihya, he talks about some of the ways about how people can discern whether you're actually angry for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or you're actually only angry on your own account. And I don't really have time to go into them here, but the thing that he was stressing is that don't fool yourself. Right? There's a type of way of fooling yourself where you know what's real and what's not, but if you keep lying to yourself, then eventually you start to believe it. So don't fool yourself and think you're actually becoming angry on account of the deen, or this is what's doing it for you, but look to your own soul.
Sorry, what was the
Sawabir يعني complete. عندك في الحاشية number 6 أي كوامل.
ما فهمتش قصده ايه.
يعني perfect complete كده. بينهما عرق يضره الغضب. So this small vein in between, they can tell when he became angry. أقنى العرنين. Here describing his nose, and it was a prominent nose, as most Arabs had. In other words, that this part here was something that was a little bit raised. This is the abneen, they say, the hard part, the bony part, not the cartilage part, but the hard part over here is an abneen. So أقنع يعني مرتفع شيئا ما. Again, that was a desirable attribute for the Arabs. له نور يعلوه يحسبه من لم يتأمله الشم. So here, there was a type of light that would be around him, surround him, his aura, and someone who didn't really من لم يتأمله يحسب من يتأمله أنه يتأمله أشم. Someone who didn't really look to that would think that there was like no space between him and the sky. يعني it would be sort of an aura around him of light, and you wouldn't really see where he ended. The Prophet says, من لم يتأمله. من متأمل is someone who looks im'an an-nadr, someone who really looks and discerns. But at first sight, you would just see light. You wouldn't see anything besides that. So you wouldn't know where he ends and where the sky begins and all of that type of thing. كث اللحية or اللحية. So he had a prominent beard. I didn't say طول اللحية, it said كث. كث means thick. And there's some difference of opinion of how big it actually was. Some of the other riwayat say that it went down beyond his neck even to almost the chest level. Some say it wasn't out bushy like that, but it was something that was more muhadhab, something that was more not as ish muhadhab, not trimmed, but more becoming. And there's other hadith that point the Prophet ﷺ once time saw a man who looked ash'ath, who looked very unkempt. It was kempt. So he saw someone who was unkempt, and he said, clean yourself up, and because his beard was going all over the place and things like that. And so the appearance of the Muslim also should be something that should look, not attractive per se for a man or even for a woman, but something that's dignified, something that doesn't look like someone's not taking care of themselves. And some of these guys out there have these beards going all over the place, and I don't think that's reflecting the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Because he told us to, there are certain acts of fitrah like cutting the nails and other things, and keeping oneself in a particular way. And he said, "Huf al-sharib wa atlaq al-lahya," and even when he said, trim the mustache and let the beard grow, obviously it didn't mean let it go without ever cutting it. Because if you take that literally, the hadith literally, right? أعفو الشنب أو أعفو الشنب أو الشارب وأطلق اللحية would mean that if I never cut it, it would come down to my knees, right? If I were never to cut anything from it. So there had to be some sort of tahdib, some sort of trimming and so forth. The ulama differ about the varying levels. Some of the madhahib, like Imam Abu Hanifa, he says al-qabda, which means that you grab from here and then whichever is coming from here you cut. That's Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam al-A'zam radiallahu anhu. The other madhahib didn't say a particular limit, a qabda or a handful. They just said it should be kept in a manner that is dignified. And some of them said, like Imam al-Shafi'i, that even the lihya and some of the interpretations is actually this part only, and that the cheeks are not really considered lughatan part in terms of the language as lihya. That's something else. So you find some of the ulama, for example, from Yemen and other places and Indonesia, that they shave this part, and that's based upon a valid interpretation they have of what the lihya means. So when it says let the lihya grow, they meant it to mean like the chin hair is here only, right? And they say this part majma' al-lihyain, where this meets down here, this is the actual lihya. Amma this is not lughatan the same as this. So they let this part grow and then this is kept trim. Again, that's a linguistic thing, but that's based upon ulama, on scholars who have researched this and have found this and this a particular practice. And then people take that out of context and think, they can have like this beard that's like this all over the place. I think it goes against the spirit of the sunnah itself, in that it pushes people away. It gives people a wrong impression of what the deed is. Allahu a'lam.
Isn't the sunnah it's meant as for the lihya and just for men to look manly, rather than having, as you said, the beard in a specific way or in a certain length? Or
Like I said, the only madhab that stated particular length was the Hanafi madhab. The other three, to my knowledge, didn't say a particular length. They just said yasun hatta. And even Imam al-Shafi'i said yukrah halq al-lihya in one of his riwayas, that it's only disliked to shave it. The other ones are a little more strict. They say it's haram. But Imam al-Shafi'i, from my understanding, says it's only makruh to shave it. Which means that if there's an opinion that allows it to be shaved without hurma, no one can condemn a person who does that. You may disagree with it, but you can't condemn them. If there's a valid opinion within the four schools of law, arba madhab, that allows something to be done, and it's a valid opinion within that school, you have no right to condemn anyone who takes that opinion. You cannot. Al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar lahu shurut. There are conditions for that. One, it has to be amr mujma' alayhi. Has to be something that everyone is in agreement with. You can't just pick something that is a minority opinion somewhere and then try to enforce that on everybody. Imam Malik rejected that. The Abbasid Khalifa came to him, Harun al-Rashid, and he said, let's make al-Muwatta the book of the Muslims everywhere. Imam Malik had in his power right then at that particular point in history to make everybody Maliki. He could have done it if he just said yes. He didn't say yes. Even though he thought his particular methodology in his school was the most correct, because that's the one he was following, he refused to enforce it upon everybody. He said after the Prophet ﷺ died, the Sahaba spread out, and because the madhab are based upon the Sahaba who went to those particular lands. Right? You'll find that the madhab of Iraq, which is mostly Abu Hanifa, is based upon the fiqh of Ibn Mas'ud, because he went to Iraq and so forth. And you find Malik is more like based on Ibn Umar, because he stayed in Medina. Shafi'i, Ibn Abbas, kada. So there were different schools based upon the companions leaving Medina and living in other places. And naturally, they would have a different fiqh, because the science, the discipline of fiqh or jurisprudence, can't be done in a vacuum. In the meaning that I can't just say a universal fiqh sort of for everyone from every time and every place. Because one of the awam and one of the agents that informs and influences what a particular legal ruling is time and place. So what may be valid for a particular time, particular place, may not be valid for another time and another place. So that being the case, Imam Malik knew that. So he said, I cannot allow you to take the Muwatta and make it the book, the fiqh for everybody. That's not correct. That would be too much. So he refused that, even though it was his own school. So that's important, that we have a plurality. يعني التعددية, right, في الفقه الإسلامي is something that is completely acceptable. Anyone who tells you that you have to follow this particular way, you have to do it in this way only, and all the other ways are wrong or incorrect, you're not allowed to do it that way, they have no idea what they're talking about. That is like a very narrow-minded, reductionist view of Islam that makes everything else seem superfluous compared to the way they have to do it. And it's not the way they have to do it. We accept different opinions because the nature of the Quran and the Sunnah is that it's subject to different interpretations. You can read the same verse, different scholars, and they can get different things out of it, or the same hadith, or the same group of hadith, depending upon their methodology. And you can't say one is more correct than the other, because it's not a concept where you can reach what's called unequivocal certainty in it, or qata'. Right? Al-umur al-qati'a wal-maqtu'a biha means those things that it's unequivocally certain. There's no other way. There are certain things in the deen that are like that. But most of the fiqh or the jurisprudence, especially outside of ibadat, when we're talking about mu'amalat and ahwal shakhsiyya, and ahkam al-zawaj and talaq, divorce and marriage and these things, there are variant opinions there. Then you can't enforce one particular opinion, because you can't say one particular opinion is the only correct one. None of the ulama did that. They would support evidence for their opinion, but at the end of the day, if they were asked, is there a possibility that you're wrong and fulan is right? They said, of course. Of course there's a possibility. They accept that. But this is what their ijtihad has led them to. But now we're living in a time where people are starting to claim that, no, this is the only way, and there can be no other right answer. So they're bringing something unprecedented that none of our ulama for the past 400 to 100 years have ever stated. That's the bid'ah. Haydi bid'ah. Ayn bid'ah. Allahu a'lam. Rabbana yahdi nufus. So, where were we? Sahl al-Khaddaini, Walead al-Fam. So also describing his cheeks and his mouth, سهل الخدين يعني they were of not coarse, not wrinkled. And in fact, Imam al-Ghazali, he mentions, I believe somewhere in the Ihya, that the Prophet ﷺ, in terms of his outer appearance, from the time he was a young man until the time he was an old man, it didn't really change much. You couldn't really tell that he had aged that much. They mentioned, when they talk about the white hairs that he had, some of them counted the number. Some of them said he had no more than 14, or no more than 8, no more than 20. So even the white hairs that he had were very few. So he was someone who appeared not to have aged that much to begin with. So ضليع al-fam, which means واسع al-fam, also a more prominent lips and mouth, was also a desirable trait for the Arab. مفلج الأسنان. Also the Arabs, in their culture, to have some space between the incisor teeth and the teeth in front of it or behind it was a desirable trait. Not to have spaces all throughout, but in between, what's called the thanaya, which are the incisor teeth, to have some of that space was a desirable thing. And that the Prophet ﷺ had that attribute. دقيق المسربة, we talked about already, which is the thin line of hair running from the top of the chest all the way down to the navel. كأن عنقه جيد دمية في صفاء الفضة. Here another beautiful description, physical description. His neck, جيد دمية, with dumya al-aj, which is ivory. So it's as if his neck was, in terms of beauty and purity, like ivory. في صفاء الفضة, but in the purity of silver. So it's not really talking about color anymore, because the difference in color between ivory, which is pure white, and silver, which is silver, is significant. So it's not saying that there was a color that was like white or silver. Obviously that's impossible. But it's talking about, in terms of radiance and beauty, his neck himself sallallahu alaihi wasallam was of that nature. معتدل الخلق بادن متماسك سواء البطن والصدر عريض الصدر بعيد or بعيد ما بين المنكبين. So here is describing his upper body. معتدل الخلق, he was of a balanced body build. Then he describes how so. بادن متماسك. Al-badin is someone who is closer to not too skinny, but not too meaty, but somewhere in between, but more on the meaty side. But then he shows how when he says mutamasik, yani mutamasik, yani not mukhalkhal, not loose with fat, but more muscular in build. Sawa'ul batni was sadr. Here they said that the sameness in the chest and the stomach is referring to that the chest was neither protruding out too much nor was the belly itself. So sawat. So if you looked at him when straight on, you would see that it would kind of be like straight from the chest to the stomach. So in other words, in the physical shape that was desirable. وفي نفس الوقت عريض الصدر, but at the same time he was broad chested in terms of this way, in terms of the width. بعيد ما بين المنكبين أو بعيد الروايتان. Wide is tasghir, which means same meaning, that he was broad between the shoulders, or the distance between the shoulders was significant. So he was broad chested and broad shouldered. ضخم القراديس. Here al-qaradis is the joints of the wrist and the hand and the ankles. ضخم, which means they were significant. Again, a desirable trait. Not fine bone, but more thick bone. أنور المتجرد. Here the mutajarrad, either the places where he doesn't have hair or the places where he doesn't have clothing on top. So you can see a sort of light, a nur emanating from his skin if you were to look at it. موصول ما بين اللبة والسرة بشعر يجري كالخط. And this is the masruba, the line that we're talking about, from the chest to the navel. عاري الثديين والبطن مما سوى ذلك. عاري means no hair on either side of the chest. والبطن, as well as the stomach. مما سوى ذلك. أشعر الذراعين والمنكبين وعالي الصدر. But he did have hair on the arms and some of the upper chest here, this area, except for obviously the line. طويل الزندين, which I think are the forearms. Just make sure. Yeah, the arms. So his arms were of a longer length. طويل الزندين. رحب الراحة. والراحة الكف, or the palm of the hand. So they said حسا ومعنى, physically and literally and figuratively. So الراحة. So rahab means واسع, yani like a fleshy type of palm, but also rahab comes from something that's inviting. So his palm of his hand was also like that, both physically and figuratively. And you'll find in other hadith we're going to read later on that they'll say they've never touched a velvety silk as fine as the hand of the Prophet ﷺ when they touched his hand. So it was an inviting hand. It was a fleshier part of the body, but at the same time was something that was inviting to people when he outstretched his hand. شثم الكفين والقدمين, again a thicker, talking again about the hands and the feet. سائل الأطراف, in other words the extremities like the fingers were a little bit long, again in a way that was desirable for the Arabs. أو قال شائل الأطراف, similar meaning. قمصان الأخمصين. Well, akhmas is the sole of the foot. Like if the foot has an arch, so the sole is the part that doesn't touch the ground. So it's describing the curvature of the foot. So he wasn't flat-footed. Someone who's flat-footed, the soles completely touch the ground, which is a shortcoming or a deficiency. But the Prophet ﷺ his foot was arched so that his actually sole didn't touch the ground, but not too arched in a way that would be considered a deformity, but in a balanced way. مسيح القدمين ينبو عنهما الماء. These two go together. مسيح القدمين means like a sleek or soft texture to the skin of his foot. ينبو عنهما الماء. So if water was poured on them, they would slide off due to the nature of the skin of the foot. So it wasn't coarse, it wasn't calloused, it wasn't anything like that, but quite the opposite. إذا زال زال قلعا. This we read in the previous hadith. يخطو تكفيا ويمشي هونا. So إذا زال زال قلعا, if he walked كالقلع, so a purposeful walk. يخطو تكفيا ويمشي هونا, and the way he walked was purposeful, but there was hawn in it. ويمشي هونا. Right, and this is the description of the believers in the Quran. الذين يمشون على الأرض هونا وإذا خاطبهم الجاهلون قالوا سلاما. So المشي here هونا, literally and figuratively. Literally in that even though there was a purpose to the way he walked, but at the same time there is a humility to it. هونا. There was an ease about it. It wouldn't make you nervous, it wouldn't make you scared. You know how if you walk in the street and you just see the way some people walk, it just makes you anxious or nervous. The Prophet ﷺ wasn't anything like that. It wouldn't make you nervous, wouldn't make you anxious, it would make you want to see who that is. It would draw you to him. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. ذريع المشية. والمشية is the type of walk. Again, see the description of the walk. There's hawn, there's ذريع المشية, which means with some speed, and then before كأن ينحط من صبب, as if he's coming down a slope. إذا زال زال قلعا, but there's a purposefulness, as if he's pulling something out of the ground. So to put all those images all at once, to try to picture them, is not easy. But that was part of the uniqueness of the Prophet ﷺ, that it can seem purposeful and it can seem gentle at the same time. It can seem rapid but humble at the same time. So those are all seeming contradictions, but when you put them into one person, such as the person of the Prophet ﷺ, they are the epitome of balance and completeness and perfection. And that's a difficult thing to do. Most people who work at any type of trade, and you want to like build the perfect car or build the perfect house, it's all about keeping things in balance, one with the next. And that's one of the most difficult parts when you're building something like this. But in the Prophet ﷺ, all things were balanced. Both his physical as well as his characteristic attributes were in perfect balance with each other. There was no contradiction. There was no grading of one thing with the next, as most of us have. There's always something where something is pulling us this way and something is pulling us that way, and it kind of makes us a little bit out of balance. But he was the epitome of balance. And that's what we mean by Deen al-Wasat. خير الأمور أوساطها. The best of matters are the awsat, or the most balanced. Right? Some people translate it as middle way, that's okay, but I think the word balanced is more applicable, because we're talking about بين الإفراط والتفريط, between two extremes. There's always two extremes. Too loose, too strict. Too fast, too slow. Too tall, too short. Too bright, too dark. But the balance between those two, that's when you reach to outside of completion. So a completion and perfection is not to go to one extreme or the next. It's to maintain a balance between those two extremes. إذا مشى كأنما حط من صبب وإذا التفت جميعا. We describe that. خافض الطرف نظره إلى الأرض أطول من نظره إلى السماء جل نظره الملاحظة. So here now he's getting into more of his characteristic attributes. خافض الطرف, his gaze will be more down, right? He kept a lower type of gaze. نظره إلى الأرض أطول من نظره إلى السماء. His gaze towards the earth would be more than his gaze towards the heavens. Why? Because هو مبعوث إلى الأرض. He is sent to the ثقلين, to the jinn and the ins of the ard. He wasn't sent as a messenger to the malaika. He was sent as a messenger to the people on earth. So his area of concern is going to be the people of the earth. It doesn't mean though that he didn't look to the skies. It just said أطول, more. But he did look to the skies. And the way that we know ourselves is by looking at those two things. And the way that we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is by knowing ourselves. And the Quran reminds us of this. سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق. سنريهم, we will show them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking in the Quran, آياتنا في الآفاق, our signs in the afaq, in the horizons, وفي أنفسهم, and in within themselves, حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق, until they discern that it's the truth, it's haq. So how do you know yourself? Look inside yourself. How do you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Knowing yourself. من عرف ربه ومن عرف نفسه عرف ربه. Whoever knows himself knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يعني تعرف نفسك بالعجز وتعرف الله سبحانه بالكمال. You know yourself with incapacity and inability, then you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has all the capability and has all the qudra and has all the azama and has all the hawl and all the quwwah. And you know that you're the opposite of that. So knowing the true nature of yourself will give you an idea of the true nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so between these two horizons, both the earth and the sama' and the heavens, one can discern these things. So the Prophet ﷺ more concerned with al-ard, because that's where he was sent. جل نظره الملاحظة. Right? Here, nazar is talking about physical sight. So most of what he would notice, what he would look at, al-mulahadha, would just be like a glimpses. Because he's not concerned with everything that's going around here. He's concerned with his mission, he's concerned with his heart, he's concerned with his Lord, and he's concerned with delivering that message from his Lord to the people. And so, his nadara was not one of covetousness, was not one of greed, was not one of thinking, do I have more than this person, or do they have more than me? Do I have what they want? Do they want what I have? None of these nadarat were part of him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were part of us, but they weren't a part of him. So in mulahadha, yulahid, he takes a glimpse. He can see in as much as he needs to understand, to maintain his da'wah, maintain his mission. But if it was not pertinent to the da'wah, he had no interest in it. It was not interesting to him. He was only interested in that which is important. And we live now in a world of complete distractions. Everything is a distraction. All around us are distractions. The phone, the TV, the internet, even advertising. People are distractions. People nowadays are just talking advertisements. All they can talk back to you is what they read on TV or saw on the internet, and they just talk it back. They don't have really anything interesting to say, most people. And that's the societies that we're living in now, whether it's here or anywhere, it's all the same. And you have the opportunity here to bring something that people haven't really seen before or experienced. If we can only embody these meanings, we will embody the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ, it'll be something so interesting to people, something so unique, something that they didn't think was there, because all they're seeing are forms, all they're seeing are snippets, all they're seeing are people making claims, but not the essence of things. And you won't see the essence of things unless you're presented with it in a true form, a true state. But if just a form, surah, bidun lub, without an essence behind it, that's not attractive to anybody, because the whole dunya is about that. The whole dunya is about forms. It's all about dhawahir. Right? يَعْلَمُونَ ظَاهِرٍ مِنْ حَيَاةِ الدُّنْيا. They know about the zahir, all the ostensible things in the dunya, but the akhirah, mafish. يَسُوقُ أَصْحَابَهُ. Right? Because we have, he didn't say يَقُودُ أَصْحَابَهُ, he said يَسُوقُ. So يَسُوقُ means he walked behind them. If it said يَقُودُ أَصْحَابَهُ, it means he walks in front of them. So al-qa'id is the one who leads from the front. Was-sa'iq is the one who leads from behind. So we should call drivers qa'id, not sa'iq, because they're sitting in the front. Unless they put the steering wheel in the back, and then it becomes sa'iq. So yasuq ashaba means that he was always behind them, leading them, showing them, but leading them in a way that there was also like a meaning of tarbiyah, nurturing them. Because if you're leading from the front, you don't see what's going on behind you. You just expect people to fall in line. Just do as I do. You know, it's like you don't care what's going on behind you. But when you lead from the back, right, and they're in front of you, then you see what's going on, and you're doing tarbiyah. You're nurturing these souls. You're bringing them somewhere. And actually, they're taking themselves. You're just giving them the push. You're showing them the way. But they're the ones who are taking themselves. Amma al-qa'id from the front, he's leading them. They may follow, or they may not follow. They can step out of line, and he will not even notice if they're still behind him or not. That's from one aspect. Another aspect, some of the hadith point that walking behind the Prophet ﷺ would be the angels themselves. So he would tell them, don't walk behind me because the angels are behind me. So walk in front of me. Allahu a'lam. And then finally, وَيَبْدُرُ مَنْ لَقِيَ بِالسَّلَامِ. He would be the first, يُبَادِرْ بِالسَّلَامِ. Right? He wouldn't think about, إيش مركزي ومقامي. هل هو يقول السلام ولا يقول السلام الأول؟ لا أنا أعلى منه في الشركة، المفروض هو يبادرني بالسلام. أنا مديره، هو المفروض يسلم علي الأول. He didn't say that. Right? There's no one أعلى من النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. There's no one higher than him. But if you saw someone, you'd say السلام عليكم. Right? He would be the first to greet them. وبعدين لفظ السلام. Right? He would say السلام عليكم. There is no better greeting than this. If people only knew. It's better than bonjour. It's better than good morning. It's better than all the other stuff that people say around here. But Assalamu alaikum, ما في أحلى منها, ما في أحسن منها. There's nothing better than that. And in fact, when you start with the salam, you also give the opportunity for the person who's responding back to you to fulfill a wajib, right? Because fulfilling rad al-salam wajib, or fard kifaya. So if you enter into a group, right, and there's a whole group, at least one of them should make the rad, or the answering back of the salam. وأجر الفرد خير من أجر السنة. So المبادرة بالسلام sunnah. Staying the salam outright to begin with, that's sunnah or mustahab, and then answering it is fard kifaya. So you give people opportunity to get even a greater reward than you did for actually saying it to begin with. So, and if that was the Prophet ﷺ, khayrul khalq, the best of creation, not just the best human being, the best of creation, period, and he would be the one to start the salam. So who are we to wait for someone else or to see what relative position we have with them and so forth before we decide or think about whether we should say salam alaikum to them. يعني كان يسلم حتى his salam was so beautiful, كانت الأحجار تسلم عليه. The rocks would give him salam, the animals would give him salam. There's nowhere that he walked except things would give their salam to him. Trees would bend towards him when he would walk. هذا كان السلام النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So I think we read 2 hadith, but still they were good. Alhamdulillah, we were able to get through them. So we'll stop here, inshallah, unless someone has any questions, comments.
Did the Prophet see the jinn? Since you sent for
he was aware of their presence when he was returning from Ta'if, and then he was on his way back to Mecca. He ran into some of the jinn, and that's where Surah al-Jinn was revealed, in that place. And there used to be a mosque called Masjid al-Jinn. I'm not sure if it's still there, with the current authorities in Saudi Arabia just plowing everything. I'm not sure if it remains, but I remember visiting it once. Masjid al-Jinn.
What is it?
Huh?
Why is it called that?
This is the place where Surah al-Jinn was revealed, and the Prophet ﷺ spoke to the jinn on his way back from Ta'if. And obviously you can see the angels when they saw him. Jinn sometimes can reveal themselves in forms that people can see, but it's not something that you would try to do usually. As I say always to people, the good jinn don't want to have anything to do with us, and the good believers don't want anything to do with them either. We're not interested in crossing that realm, that dimension, and having a relationship. So it's only the bad from them and the bad from us that get together. No.
I know لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. I know the قوة. What's حول?
There have been different in tafsir about what's the difference between hawl and quwwah. Probably the better ones that I've heard is hawl is because when you have qudra to do something, you can either actually execute it, or you have the ability within yourself and you don't do it. What's the potential to do something? Fal-hawl is the potential. So no one really even has a potential to do something except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the actual executable, يعني القوة التنفيذية, also is only with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So القوة الصلوحية يعني هو يصلح أن يفعل أن يقدر أن يعمل، هذا لله وحده. وكذلك القدرة التنفيذية هذا لله وحده كذلك. So لا حول ولا قوة. الحول حتى the ability أن أنا أعمل حاجة, it's not really with me, it's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
حول is ability.
حول is potential ability, not executed. أما القوة ممكن عند التنفيذ أو التنفيذ نفسه.
بس مش من تحول. مش حول جاي من تحول.
لا طبعا نفس الكلمة بس المعنى مختلف، مش نفس المعنى. حال يحول حولا. يعني حال يحول حولا also means to get in between something. It's from the same word you get muhal, which means impossible. So it's like a force يعني مصدر قوة. But in this context لا حول ولا قوة يعني قوة لم تنفذ بعد، وأما القوة نفسها قابل للتنفيذ. والله أعلم. في تفاسير تانية طبعا، بس يعني ربما هذه مناسبة.
Can you elaborate on when you were saying getting to know Allah and getting to know ourselves? Getting to know Allah, the way to get to know Allah.
أيوه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond any of our imagination or comprehension. Why? Because all that we can possibly imagine would be things we have already come into contact with. So, for example, a cow can't fly, right? Cows don't fly. But I can imagine such a thing. I can picture it in my head. Why? Because I've seen other things fly, like birds, and maybe in a movie somewhere they made a cow fly. So the picture, surah of a cow flying, I can imagine that. But whatever we try to do, we can never imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His that, His essence, we can't imagine it. Why? Because it's unlike anything that we've experienced. We've never come into contact with anything, and we never will. So it's unimaginable. That's the beginning of ma'rifah, so to speak. Of knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is knowing that you can't know Him. That's what Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq said. العجز عن الإدراك إدراك. يعني admitting to yourself that you can't know Him in that way, that's the beginning of knowing Him. The ulama of Aqidah, when they first describe some of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they start with the sifat al-salbiyya. Usually sifat al-salbiyya means those things that are negative attributes, yani saying everything that Allah is not. So He is batin, right? Will be forever, never ends. We can't really imagine that, because we never come into contact with anything that never ends. Everything that we know of our experience has a beginning and has an end. So rationally, intellectually, you can tell me something, this thing will never end, but to really imbibe that meaning, you have to go beyond the rational to really, really live that and understand that. But that's the beginning. مخالفة للحوادث. He's not like anything else. Okay, but how? How's that possible? Again, it's something that's difficult to comprehend when you actually try to picture it. So the way that you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is via His signs, His ayat. And there are many. That's why the ayah, a verse in the Quran, is called a verse or a sign, because it's a sign that leads you, shows you towards Him. But there are also ayat, like we said in the verse, fil afaq wa fi anfusihim. There are signs to discern in the dunya itself. The whole dunya is a sign. The whole dunya, everything in it, all of creation, that's all signs in it. It's all there for us to figure out who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually is. And even our own selves, wa fi anfusihim. Even within our own selves, for those who can't see the signs out, see the signs in. There are signs to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. And namely, the main sign that you see both in the afaq and in yourselves is imperfection. In the sense that, or incapability. You're not capable of doing this and doing that, and no matter how much I do, the outcome is never guaranteed. That's ajaz. That's incapability, right? You can't say you're really capable of something if you don't know if the outcome is going to turn out your way or not. No one can be certain. You can put a certain amount of energy or time and money and resources on a particular thing, but can you guarantee the outcome, right? The soccer team, football team can train for years and weeks and months for the tournament, but can anyone guarantee they'll win? You cannot, because the outcome is not in their hands. So when you begin to see and actually live La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, right? Not just the beginning is to say it, right? Because we believe there's an intricate connection between what the tongue says and the effect it has on its heart. And so when you start saying it enough, then that will have that effect on the heart, until the heart starts beating with that meaning. And then when that happens, it's not your tongue saying it, it's your heart wanting you to say it. So here the driver is not the tongue anymore, it's your heart driving you, telling the tongue what to say. And this is Imam al-Ghazali's description of how one can go from one level of dhikr, which is the dhikr of the tongue, and then you go to the next level, which is the dhikr of the heart, and then the final level, which is complete fana, or complete annihilation into only the madhkur. So it's not even dhikr of the tongue and the heart anymore, everything is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which again, it's a description. Unless you've actually tasted and lived that, it's very difficult to, I couldn't describe it to you because I'm not there. But those people who've lived that, they know what this means. So, yeah, we could spend hours talking about that. Whole books and volumes have been written about knowing yourself and then knowing your Lord.
I just want to know how can we benefit from learning about physical attributes and characteristics of the Prophet and his traits, we can follow his traits and look at his actions, but the physical appearance of him, how can we benefit?
No. Imam al-Bayjuri, he says in this commentary that there's a secret in studying his physical attributes that may not be, that may not be discernible to everybody. So some people you're reading, okay, his arms were this length and he had hair here, didn't have hair there. But these people recorded it for a reason, right? They wouldn't have not recorded it unless it meant something, unless there was a meaning behind it. And someone who, it goes back to the meaning of mahabba. If you truly love something, you want to know everything about it, right? Someone, nowadays people, if they find like a friend or fiance or husband or wife that they want to marry, they're in love with, they go on Google and they search for them and they find everything about them. They want to find all the images and who their friends are and where they've been and kada. Why? Because this is ishq al-mahbub. They're in love with the object, the beloved themselves, so they want to know everything. So there are ushaq, right, ashiqeen, who want to know everything about the Prophet ﷺ. So when they read things like this, it's like, wow, that too, and kada, and that meaning is even built up more in their hearts because now they're getting to know the object of that love. We're not reading it just about a man that lived in some historical figure. وَعَلَمُوا إِنَّ فِيكُمْ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. الآن, he is with you now, not something. I don't even like saying historical figure. هذا doesn't give him his right when we say that, because his worldly death may have happened, but he's still alive, right? He's still alive in his grave, and he should be alive in our hearts. The meaning, his legacy is still alive. And it's no coincidence that the last hadith in this book talks about seeing the Prophet ﷺ in a dream. Right? مَنْ رَآنِي فَقَدْ رَآنِي فَإِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَا يَتَمَثُّلُ بِي. Whoever sees me has seen me, because the shaitan cannot take my form in a dream. And many are the people who have read Shama'il, or have really imbibed the meaning of the Shama'il, and after that they see the Prophet ﷺ not just once but many times in their dreams. And that means if you actually see him, you've seen him. He's come to you. For him to come to you is a meaning, there's a ma'na. He doesn't come to everybody. He only comes to those people who love him and whom he loves. And so if we want to build up the meaning of love within ourselves for him, then we want to know everything about him. We want to know his surah, his actions, his attributes. We want to know all the manifestations of perfection, even in his physical attributes that the companions and the tabi'een and all the scholars of hadith, they brought to us after, because it's without it, how can we know him? We have a golden opportunity to know everything about him. We don't have this detailed description of Al-Masih alayhi salam, Jesus. You know what the best description of Jesus is? Whose description? His description. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the hadith we're going to read next, he describes, he looks like this particular sahabi that is with us, because he saw him. Laylat al-Isra wal Mi'raj, the night of ascension, when he went to Jerusalem and prayed and led all 124,000 prophets who've ever come in prayer on the Fil Aqsa, and then he went to the heavens, and he also met some of those same prophets in the heavens. He saw all of them. He knows what they look like. So he described them. He described Sayyidina Musa. He described Ibrahim. He described Isa, Jesus, alayhi salam. But we don't have a complete description as we do, except for him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so we should take advantage of all that's there. Even in the seerah, all of the seerah that have been written, we know his activities, where he went, the people he met, how he spoke to them. So it's a ni'mah that we don't really realize the blessing, realize the size of it, unless you begin to delve into it. We should be spending more time on it. If we spend all our time on it, we wouldn't be wasting our time. Anyone else? من الرجال؟ طيب جزاكم الله خير. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يوفقنا ويهدينا وأن يزدنا في طاعته وأن يعنا على ذكره وشكره وحسن عبادته وأن يفرج عن المسلمين في كل مكان، في سوريا وفي ليبيا وفي تونس وفي فلسطين وفي بورما وفي أفغانستان وفي باكستان وفي سائر بلدان المسلمين، وأن يوفق بيننا وبين أهل الخير للخير، وأن يصلح بيننا وبين إخواننا، وأن يصلح بين أبنائنا وأبناء هذا الوطن، وأن يلهم ولاة أمورنا إلى الطاعة وإلى الخير وإلى ما هو في صالح العباد والبلاد، وأن يلحقنا بالصالحين ويفتح لنا فتوح العارفين، وأن يخرجنا من دائرة سخطه إلى دائرة الرضا، وأن يجعل آخر كلمة في الدنيا لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله، حسا ومعنى ظاهر وباطن، ومن حضرة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. الفاتحة.